A lot of us Florida gardeners are waiting right now for temperatures to warm up before we can plant our spring crops. Some of us are waiting for that last spring frost date to pass, while some of us don't even get a frost at all. I'm looking at you, Miami. Regardless of where you are in Florida, now is the perfect time to be amending your garden soil to promote healthy, big crops this spring season. In today's video, I'm going to share with you 4 things you should be adding to your garden to get big, healthy crops all season long. Let's get into it. The number one thing you should be adding to your soil is compost. Compost is the primary thing that is going to keep your soil healthy. If you're new to gardening, compost is usually made up of greens and browns, where greens might be something like your kitchen scraps, and your browns might be something like dried up leaves or old paper egg cartons. When these browns and greens combine, they break down over time, usually with the help of heat or maggots or worms, and it turns into this nutrient-dense mixture, which we usually refer to as black gold. As you can see, the compost is really dark in color and has a nice texture to it. That's why we call it black gold. If there's one thing you take away from this video, it's that you need to be adding compost to your garden soil on a regular basis. I typically will add it before my fall plantings, before my spring plantings, and again before my summer plantings. And when I add it, I'm usually adding 2 to 3 inches of it right on top of my soil in my raised beds. Now, my second season gardening, I failed to add compost or any other amendments for that matter to my garden, and it was just so obvious that my plants were suffering. They were growing so painfully slow that I never thought I would reach a harvest date for some of them, and for some of them I never did. Compost does a lot of positive things for your soil. It helps improve the soil structure, meaning it helps your Florida sandy soil retain some of the nutrients instead of letting it all get washed away in the rain. It also boosts the nutritional content of your soil. It provides a slow release of the essential nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium for your garden. It also enhances the microbial activity in your soil. It contains beneficial bacteria and fungi that help break down nutrients so your plants can absorb them better. Compost helps with water retention, meaning you may be able to spend less time watering. This is something that's really going to come in handy in the spring when the temperatures start heating up and the water starts evaporating faster out of your garden. Adding compost is absolutely necessary for the organic gardener because it's a natural, slow-release fertilizer for your plants, and it helps you reduce the need for fertilizing throughout the season. So if you're like me and you struggle with fertilization schedules, you can still have a really happy and healthy garden just by adding a few inches of compost to your soil at the beginning of the season. Now, the drawback to only adding compost to your garden is that sometimes the soil will feel a little too dense. That leads me into the next item we should be adding into our soil, and that is earthworm castings. Worm castings are another source of nutrient-rich organic matter to add back into your garden. But it also majorly helps with the aeration of your soil. Worm castings are very mild and you can add a ton of it to your garden without worrying you're going to burn the crops. Worm castings are full of beneficial microbes that help break down organic matter and make the nutrients more available to plants. They're also helpful to add if you're fighting against root knot nematodes. Now, spring in Florida is one of those seasons where we're going to start seeing a lot of pests and a lot of disease pressure on our crops. Another good reason to add worm castings to your garden is that it contains enzymes and hormones that stimulate root growth and helps strengthen plants to fight against some diseases. Now, although you can buy a bag of worm castings on Amazon, and I clearly have, one of the other ways that I try to introduce worm castings into my garden is by using an in-bed vermicompost bin. Whenever you see a white bucket in my garden as I'm walking and talking through it, this is my vermicompost bin. This is where I put my food scraps and my browns, and then I've also added red wiggler worms, and there's holes in the bucket as well. The red wiggler worms will break down the compost, and they'll also travel in and out of the bucket through those holes and aerate the soil and drop their worm castings throughout the soil. Whenever the worms have worked their way all the way through the compost in my bucket, I can just empty it out and spread it throughout my garden. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about how I did that, check out this video right here, an intro to vermicomposting. In this past fall season, I added a lot of compost and a lot of worm castings to my garden, and it was generally very, very healthy. However, this next item is something that I omitted, and I learned my lesson. We also need to be adding in trace minerals to our garden soil. Last season, when I neglected to add any trace minerals to the garden, I was noticing symptoms of nutrient deficiencies showing up. So I saw something that looked like an iron deficiency or a magnesium deficiency. It was yellowing leaves and green stems, and I was able to correct it by adding a liquid fertilizer, but I could tell something was off with the mixture of my compost and my worm castings. Adding trace minerals to your soil is kind of similar to us taking our vitamins in the morning or drinking our electrolytes. So this season, what I've bought is azomite. Azomite is from volcanic ash, and it contains a lot of those trace minerals that I was missing my last growing season. Now, similar to what I did, if you don't add them, there's other ways to add them back in throughout the growing season after you notice some deficiency symptoms. But I want to start my crops off on the right foot this season and make sure my soil is not deficient of minerals. So this season, I'm adding azomite to my garden for the first time, and if you're interested in hearing about whether or not I notice deficiency signs, hit that subscribe button and follow along. So adding compost, worm castings, and trace minerals to your soil are going to create a well-rounded, nutrient-dense soil in your garden. The next section I want to talk about is some amendments or fertilizers we can add to the garden that will actually help prevent pest problems. Spring is a time in Florida when we have really heavy pest pressure, and we really have the best shot at fighting against these pests if we can somehow prevent them. Now, if you've ever gardened in Florida before, chances are you've experienced root knot nematodes. I just made a video last week, which I'll put a link to right here, that talks through how I was able to get rid of a root knot nematode problem in my garden. I attribute most of my success to the addition of crab meal in my garden. Crab meal is made from crab shells ground up, and the chitin in crab meal actually promotes the populations of beneficial microbes in your soil, which will reduce populations of root knot nematodes in your soil. I highly recommend buying crab meal and spreading it throughout your garden. The way that I did it was spreading a 5-pound box throughout 100 square feet of garden as a broad application, right at the same time as my compost and my worm castings. The next thing I'm adding to my garden soil this spring is a new one for me, and you guys will have to drop a comment below to let me know if you've heard about it or not. I'm talking about neem seed meal. Now, a lot of us have been told to use neem oil for a lot of pest issues or disease issues that come up throughout the season. Personally, I hate using neem oil. It never fails. Every time I use neem oil, the sun is too harsh and it ends up burning my plants. But I've heard that adding neem seed meal to your soil will actually provide similar garden pest control as neem oil without the risk of burning your leaves. This is an organic product as well, so it's going to be slow release fertilizer, and I'm really excited to see if this will help me keep away some of those pickle worms and cabbage worms that always show up in the spring. As a downside for both of these items, this one I can confirm smells really bad. This one I haven't yet opened up, but I've heard it reeks really badly. I can't say that and not smell it, right? Oh my God. Ugh. So while we're all waiting for the temperatures to warm up, I hope you're going to be adding these 4 things to your garden soil to help promote healthy crops this spring.